Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Caroline Raffi. I'm the VP of Enterprise with Ducere Global Business School. Here at Ducere, our mission and vision is to design and deliver the world's most industry-applied university degrees. These degrees are there to advance students' career. We're passionate to help deliver quality education to all and to help overcome barriers. And the biggest barriers are time and cost. So again, while other universities might focus on academic publishing, research, we don't do any of that. We're dedicated, again, to deliver degrees that are specifically focused on in students' career progression. Hence why we're having this webinar today, primarily focusing on influence of AI and within the workforce. And this webinar is designed to address the far-reaching implementation for career development and growth. I want to thank Amir and Sheila for joining us and accepting our invite. I'm going to let you guys take over. If you can, please introduce yourselves.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Amir Jalali. I'm CIO at Avenue AI. Avenue is a recruiting company that's trying to use AI to make things just a lot more efficient, more personable. I also do some advising for other AI tangential companies like Placed and Virtual Leap. My background has been in data, and I've just watched over the last 2 years how AI is transforming industries, and I've been just, bewildered and amazed. So I dove deep into it, and I hope to share some of what I've learned with you all.
Great. Thank you so much, Amir. Hi, everyone. It is a pleasure and an honor to be here. I'm thrilled for this opportunity. My name is Sheila Saibi. I'm based out of Silver Spring, Maryland. It's right outside of the DC metropolitan area in the US. I started my career in tech around operations engineering, and now I head up the open source program and strategy at Comcast, which is a global media technology company and also a provider. I've been with the company for over a decade. I'm passionate about community building. I'm laser focused on developer experience and happiness. In my role, I help drive the company's open source strategy and advance the collaboration within the broader tech ecosystem, and especially across the open source community. Because my team works so closely with the developer community, AI was something that came to us. AI corporate policy, usage, and strategy is something I'm interested in and working on.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We're very excited to have you guys here. So I'm gonna open it to Amir, and you have full control over the presentation. Please jump in and share your knowledge.
Sure. Let me see. Do I just click to go forward? All right, there we go. Can I go back? Okay, overdid
Yeah,
that.
Amir, I'm controlling it right now. Just
oh, you're
FYI.
controlling.
Just let me
Got
know.
it.
Yeah.
All right, perfect. Yeah. So I just want to jump right into it and see what's been going on with AI. We've all been hearing a lot about it over the past year or so. Chat GPT, large language models, Midjourney, Stable Diffusion. A lot of things have just been released in the last year or two that they've gone from not being very impressive to very almost scary. So, why is it that we're seeing these developments? I just want to give a little overview of that. So basically, four things have kind of converged to this point in time in 2022, where we saw Chat GPT released and people were, amazed at what has happened, because neural networks, which are the building blocks, have been around since the 1940s, at least theoretically, and not a lot was going on. So there's been some improvements in the algorithms, the underlying algorithms. One of them is the transformers architecture. And there's a lot more detail on these elements in the references of this presentation, and I'll hopefully it'll share with you if you want to go deeper. On the hardware side, a lot of GPU capacity came online. Some of that was related to people playing video games. Ironically, some of it was with regards to the cryptocurrency, and so we have a lot more capacity and processing power. And then there was the data. The internet is basically this huge repository of data that allows the algorithms to learn from everything that we do, everything that we see, everything that we're putting online on YouTube, everywhere. And the last piece is scaling, because these models require a tremendous amount of money and resources to be trained, like around over $100 million and above. So all four of those converged, and they brought us to this type of magical place where something else happened. Bill, you can go to the next page. Them by themselves, that doesn't really describe why things have gotten a bit interesting and at the same time a little bit weird. So this is where I think people have a little bit of apprehension, because at a certain level of scale, the large language models in particular, they start to exhibit behaviors that they weren't trained to do. Like these are called emergent abilities. So at a certain level, they're behaving the way we expect them to. They're predicting the next word in the sequence. But after a certain level, they can just do certain things that they were never expected to. For example, here, performing arithmetic, answering questions, summarizing passages, and more. They're just learning on the data, and as they've scaled, they're starting to do new things. So the reason that is a big part of the conversation is that's where I think people fall into camps of either saying this is going to be the end of humanity, or these are great tools, because nobody really understands why this is happening very well. So even Noam Shazir is the guy that he was the #2 author on one of the seminal papers in AI, and in one of his papers he wrote, "We offer no explanation as to why these architectures seem to work. We attribute their success as all else to divine benevolence." A bit tongue in cheek, but it just goes to show you the people that are building the tools are not fully understanding the why. And so, that's where some people are a little bit more worried about what's to come. We might be at the end of the road. Carol, are you asking a question? I'm sorry. We might be at the end of the road where this is it. They don't do anything new and interesting, but I think more people expect that as we continue to scale, they're going to become more and more capable. And so I think that's where a lot of the debate and the apprehension comes from. We can go to the next slide. So in terms of like the timeline of how quickly these things have happened, ChatGPT was released under 1 year ago. It's hard to believe, but it hasn't even been a year. And what that allowed was it allowed a natural language interface to these large language models, which really democratized the way people were using them. And before that, you had to kind of build an interface, create an API, and there were things like Jasper AI and other tools that were used for like summarizing or building, little pieces of copywriting. But now you could just ask it to do something for you, and it could do that. And so ChatGPT became the most successful application in human history. It hit 100 million monthly users in 2 months. And then in March, OpenAI, and sorry if I'm focused a lot on OpenAI, I think it's more accessible, but this is happening across different companies at the same scale. So in March, GPT-4 was announced, and it gave API access to ChatGPT, which created a whole nother boom of companies and industries. And they also added vision, sound, and document ingestion. And just in this past Monday, they had OpenAI had a dev day where they released plans for custom GPTs, where you could basically create a GPT that you felt would satisfy a certain need, and you could participate in revenue sharing on their platform, which is essentially like having an app store of GPTs. And so that's going to open up a whole nother range of opportunities. They released that there's 100 million weekly users now, and they opened their vision and everything into API access, which essentially is giving the computer and the GPT a way to see and hear, and in addition to just being text-based.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, sorry. So talk about ChatGPT for someone like myself that's like, trying to, get in there slowly but surely, but still, be careful, and you don't know what you don't know. If you're only using just one tool like ChatGPT, are there any downsides to it? or you can just if that's your bread and but just do that for now.
Yeah. So there's definitely yeah, OpenAI started as like a kind of open model of how these things are working out, and they quickly, and Sheila will speak to this, but they kind of closed down their open sourcing of their models and their weights. I think they were scared, or maybe it's a competitive fear. So as a company, if you're relying on just one platform like ChatGPT, that's definitely a big major risk, you know. So it's always good to diversify. And then additionally, there's reasons why you don't need to use something like ChatGPT for every task, because you might just need to do like a small analytical task where a model that's much smaller and cheaper to run would do that job for you, rather than trying to do everything with it. So there's definitely pros and cons, but I would say the reason I focus on it is it's very accessible. So for somebody that's looking for a job, or somebody that's just an end user for their own personal use, I think it's one of the most accessible ways. In addition to the way, you know, Microsoft is also releasing it to all their products, and Google as well.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to show this as well to say that there's a parallel track. It's just not just, you know, Chat GPT or GPTs or large language models, the diffusion models, the audio transcription and speech models, they're all growing at a crazy breakneck speed. So in February of 2022, you can see what Midjourney V1, these are all the same prompts. I ran the same exact prompt on their different versions that they're still hosted, and you can see the progress that it's made in a little over a year and a half, I think. And you know, this is happening across the board, and so that's why it's such an exciting field. It's also really hard to keep up with it, because if you don't keep up for 2 weeks, it feels like you've like just completely dropped the ball. Um, you can go to the next. So just for a little bit more practical information, like I said, I'm a CIO at Avenue AI, and that's a pretty good position to be, to give you some information about how are companies that are recruiting currently using AI, or what are the plans for the future. As a potential future job seeker, how could you benefit from like knowing what is being used? So at Avenue, we're basically trying to improve the recruitment process in a way that saves time for everybody involved. Like, so on the recruitment side, we're using chatbots that are AI enabled, which allow you to schedule interviews. So that first application that you send in, it might ask some basic questions like, are you old enough? And, you know, are you legally required? And, you know, simple questions like that. And then we can schedule the interview. The next steps on our recruitment side are to integrate that with voice bots, so you can have a natural conversation with that. And then potentially going to a secondary interview, where at this phase, we wouldn't want to only use AI to determine whether a person is qualified or not. But that can become good additional information if you have like 1,000 applicants to a job, and you know, you don't have time to go through everybody. It could be an additional field that you could look at. Sean, go ahead.
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest fears that just people, normal people like myself, you know, we're talking, it's like, well, this is really scary because using an AI, you know, recruiter reduces the need or even eliminates the job for a human recruiter. And there's something to be said about, you know, when you meet with human to human, you know, there's, I don't know, that je ne sais quoi, the feeling, the energy or whatnot. So how would that be eliminated, or can you talk to that
Yeah,
point?
definitely. Yeah, I think that, you know, just looking at it from my perspective, I've spoken to recruiters that, you know, for a company that has a high volume turnover field, and they have 140 employees, and one person that's has another job but is also a recruiter, has to do up to 17 interviews a day, you know. So there's, I think that what's going to happen, I think, is a lot of the redundant tasks that are taking our time might be reduced, and then we can focus, because I don't think the last piece of this, where you do need to have a face-to-face conversation, or just to determine fit and culture and things like that, we're nowhere near being to the point to get rid of that with AI. I think you're right about having that human to human connection, but there's a lot of time being spent and wasted that could be saved by using these tools. So on top of that, like for the evaluations, we're releasing resume screening tools, AI scoring, performance reviews, skills tests. On the recommendation side, we can recommend jobs to you based on behavior analysis, upgrading your resume or cover letter, or on the other side, the job posting where the employer is posting a job, and also for their ad budget planning, which is how do I spend my money in order to get the right candidates through the door. So there's a lot of interesting things that we're testing and releasing, and I think this is just a snapshot of how companies across the board are going to be using these tools. Bill, you can go. All right, so on an optimistic note, because I am an optimist, and I actually, I got really excited when I heard about all these tools. How can somebody that's entering the workforce right now look at these tools in terms of opportunities or ways that they can progress their career? First of all, I think for entrepreneurs right now is one of the best times ever. The barrier to entry is dropped to very, very low levels. If you don't know how to code, it can get you to a certain level. If you don't know how to draw, it can take you to a certain level. If you don't know how to read, well, you shouldn't know how to read if you're going to be an entrepreneur. But if your writing isn't your number one, skill set or advantage, it really helps people push past those barriers to entry. So even with an idea and motivation, you can really take yourself a lot further than you could maybe just 2 years ago. The second thing is a lot of career options are opening up. It's not just that careers are going away. All of these integrations require people that, work with the AI. Some of these are mostly technical jobs, a lot of like AI engineer, there was a lot of talk about prompt engineering. And so there are a lot of new positions opening up. There's AI ethicists and all these other requirements that Sheila I think will speak to. And then on the personal improvement, basically everything that you do, you can now enhance it and kind of do a better job of it. You have somebody to bounce ideas off of. And so you can leverage your skills and talents with AI tools. You can learn a lot more with them. And so that will give you an advantage. Right now, I think hopefully most of the folks on this call are actively using the tools that are at their disposal. But if not, I think I would highly recommend folks check them out.
Thank you.
Um,
One thing that I remember when you and I were speaking previously, you mentioned that it really made, opened my eyes, was it's difference between the regular map, like paper map, and Google Maps. How things that really, put things in perspective for me, that how you're now, able to go farther or eliminates, like you said,
definitely
errors to get you to the same point that it would, but in a faster and more efficient way.
Exactly. And we do have to be a little cautious that, the tools aren't exactly to the point where they're very 100% accurate. So, looking at it from a company's perspective, you don't want to have AI be that last line of defense, because, there's not that guarantee that it doesn't make a mistake at this point. But I think hopefully we'll get there to a higher degree of accuracy. So I've given you an overview of AI and how you can leverage it in your career. So I'll turn it over to Sheila so she can talk about AI policies, procedures, and a little bit more about how it's actively being used in corporate world today.
Thank you, Amir, for that wonderful overview. It's so, like you heard, it's no surprise that AI is being increasingly used across the workplace. People are using it every day across various industries. I'll specifically be talking to you all a little bit about how it can be used, what trends I've been seeing in the community, especially communities around open source software developers across the tech industry, and what companies are doing so they aren't actually left behind. Next slide, please. Before we get into all that, I do have to mention this quote that Uncle Ben passed on to his nephew, Spider-Man. It's always the first quote that comes to mind when I think of AI. With great power comes great responsibility. This is a timeless wisdom from Spider-Man, and I think it resonated with me more now than it ever did. It's a sentence that's now become synonymous with what it means to be a leader in the space. So as we're seeing this rise of AI in the business world, it's become important to remember these wise words, because the future we thought was coming, it's actually here. AI is already part of our lives, whether we like it or not. Many of us are using it every single day, whether we know it or not. So through AI, we can actually achieve a lot of incredible things, like Amir mentioned, but it's definitely our collective responsibility to ensure that these powers are used for good, not bad. Just like Spider-Man, he was swinging through the city to protect the citizens. We have to navigate this new digital realm and world with the same sense of caution, moral compass, vigilance, responsibility. And so thank you. So I'll give you all a little bit of a recap of what was going on over the years. In the very beginning, Amir mentioned November of 2022, we saw that ChatGPT had been announced. And we quickly saw that a lot of companies started taking a stance on it. But this isn't a new thing for technologies. Companies, they actually do face challenges when adopting new technology at work. So back in the early 2000s, social media, if you all remember, it was kind of not okay to be browsing Facebook during the day at work, in the office. It looked like you weren't being productive or that work wasn't being done. But now that it's become more mainstream and it's more business focused, that's social media is okay. The same thing I think goes for calculators, for example. Calculators are the same thing. People were like, oh, nobody's going to do math anymore. Nobody's going to learn math. Schools started banning calculators. And we also saw the same thing happen with the cloud. A lot of companies, there were public clouds that came out like GCP, Google Cloud Platform, or AWS, Amazon Web Services. And companies thought it was too risky to put all of their eggs into one basket, or to let these cloud providers have all of their data, partially because it was expensive too. But now we're seeing worldwide global cloud adoption from these small companies to big. So companies started hosting, and you can go back, please. I'm still on that slide. Thank you. So in the beginning, these companies were hosting their own private clouds, and some of them still are doing this hybrid cloud model, but you'll see that things changed over time. So this hesitation about data security and privacy, it's a normal thing that happens in the tech world and within companies. And it's just something that companies are slow to adopt. But let's go ahead and fast forward again to what Amir said, November 30th, 2022. That was about a year ago, in about 3 weeks. OpenAI did their press release on ChatGPT, and as soon as that press release came out, we started seeing these big companies and small ones, from Fortune 50s to startups, having policies. They're like, you cannot use ChatGPT. Generative AI is not allowed. Between that announcement and through the spring of 2023, so within like 6 months, we saw these companies going back and forth on using these tools. Either you can or you can't. Samsung, they banned the use of generative AI tools after they discovered there was sensitive data uploaded into ChatGPT. Companies started assessing ways in which these capabilities could be used, but it's important to note that these policies were temporary. Amazon caught snippets of text generated by ChatGPT that looked exactly like their own internal documentation, and it freaked them out. Apple restricted employees from using AI tools like ChatGPT. They're worried that their confidential info is going to be leaked into these systems. Verizon, Citigroup, Goldman Sachs, Spotify, Wells Fargo, Accenture all had these similar stories. But despite all of these concerns, a lot of businesses, they're actually super excited about the time saving and the cost saving, which is a good sign. And it was an early sign that these companies are actually warming up to the idea of AI-assisted work. But of course, they're not sure where to start. This fast-moving landscape, everything is changing every single day. It's created this really interesting dynamic. So companies have FOMO, this fear of missing out, but they also don't want to slip up at the same time. So it's kind of a interesting arena that we're in. If you don't keep up, you'll be left behind, but how do you do it right? So it wasn't long before these companies started integrating AI, generative AI into their operations, because you realize you're competing with these startups. Some of these startups are built directly on these tools. If you wait too long, you could lose business. You could lose from your bottom line. So in the next slide, please, we'll talk about some of the risks and why companies started enforcing these temporary policies. Amir touched a little bit on some of the risks. There are a bunch that I have listed out here. These risks can happen when employees insert sensitive text. I think that's a big one, or code into these applications. You have to be careful about protecting the sensitive information. Whatever you insert into the generative AI tools, it could potentially become part of the training set. So that means the algorithm basically learns from the data that you input, and it could incorporate it into its algorithms for generating the future responses. So that's a huge risk. Data privacy. If you have sensitive third-party or internal and company information entered, it could be shared with others who potentially ask irrelevant questions. This could also lead to data leakage. You could violate the company's security policies, and there are always bad actors on the internet, so you have to be really careful. And because ChatGPT and other chatbots, they rely on human feedback, information that's found on the internet, there's an inherent risk that users will receive wrong information or biased information. And then if you share that wrong information or inaccurate information with your customer, then that's not a good look for the company. So that could potentially be a risk. So GitHub Copilot, we've talked a little bit about ChatGPT. GitHub Copilot is one that I mostly engage with our developers with. And that one it's a revolutionary tool. It basically transforms plain English into code across a ton of programming languages. And it's trained on billions of lines of codes, of open source code. But then we run into this issue with attribution. Open source software users, they tend to mostly understand the importance of attribution and licensing to use the software. But AI, like Copilot, it doesn't necessarily grasp those requirements. So it could lead to compliance issues. If you're using your code output and directly copying and pasting it, you could be actually using someone else's code and you might not know it. And then that code might have a restrictive license, and you might not be allowed to actually use it, but you might not know that immediately. So that becomes a risk, and especially if you're doing it from a corporate stance. So while these tools might amaze us and wow us with their abilities, their strength can also be a weakness. The unpredictability and the inconsistency can definitely happen. And I will, again, just quote Amir on this, these tools are getting better. So while some of these outputs are mind-blowing, I mean, they might be phenomenal, sometimes they're weird and they're creepy and wrong. So these AI models, they draw from a vast internet pool, and then you could get bad information sometimes. And sometimes these are called hallucinations. Since generative AI tools can be influenced by the source data that's coming in, you also run the risk of bias with like racism, sexism, ageism, all sorts of discrimination. And then that could also corrupt the output. And then there's another bias that has been coined. It happens so often. There's a name for it. It's called automation bias. This basically means that people tend to trust output of software programs. So you have to make sure additional manual verification is done after you get the output. This problem is also increases a lot because if you all have used ChatGPT or some of these generative AI tools, you'll see that the output can be wrong, but it comes off in a really confident tone. So it's a little confusing. And then finally, there's a lot of unanswered questions when it comes to attribution and copyrighted material. I will preface this by saying I'm not a lawyer. But our open source office and open source offices in general, they work super close with legal teams because we have to define policies and procedures across the company for software. Right now, a lot of people don't realize that these tools, they let you generate images or code, but who owns the generated image or the code? Is it the AI tool? No. And guess what? You don't own it either. How many of you may remember there was a monkey selfie that went out on the internet? There was a story where this monkey managed to somehow take a selfie. And then these humans, they wanted to get a copyright of the selfie on behalf of the monkey. Well, it turns out that in the US, there's no copyright protection for work that's generated by a machine or a monkey, only by humans. So that photo ended up going into the public domain. It's available to use by everyone. And then the courts, they consistently said that only humans are eligible for the copyright in the US. So this isn't the only example. There's a lot more like it. But what we're learning from these similar experiences is that copyright is in the US, it's possible if the creator can prove there was more substantial human input than AI input. So the only thing that's eligible for copyright now are if you are heavily editing, let's say something after it's done, after it's generated, then you may be able to get a copyright. But I don't think that's going to last forever. It's just important to keep in mind that right now, your output might not be copyrightable. If you're not careful, you could also run into copyright infringement issues, like with code-generated AI tooling. There's one that's most notably called Code Whisperer. And basically what Code Whisperer does is if the code output matches closely to one of the inputs that you put in, it will actually give you automatically an inline attribution. And last time I checked, GitHub Copilot is still working on a similar feature, but it's not out yet. So for code that comes from, let's say, a restrictive license, you could run into potentially open source compliance issues. And so with this range of risk, understanding the challenges, the complexity, companies need to come up with comprehensive strategies to mitigate these risks and ensure that AI is aligning with the existing company policy. Next slide, please. Great. So why are we even talking about these best practices to begin with? In most places, you'll find that AI is coming from the bottom. Developers are already using it. They do not care if you have a policy in place. If companies are already, if you're not planning on dealing with this ASAP, you need to deal, you have to deal with it right away. And just like open source software back in the day, it also was another thing that came from the ground up. It's already happening. It's coming from the bottom. You're not going to be able to stop it. So for anyone that has an organization of a significant size, let's just say like over 50, it's probably already being used. So here are some of the best practices and given the potential risks we discussed. And then please keep in mind, so these best practices are always evolving because everything is changing in this landscape. First off, it's critical for companies to provide guidance to their employees. So if you are a new employee, check to see if you have AI guidelines. Most of the time you join a new company, you'll find that there are a ton of security guidelines. They'll tell you, don't put your password in Slack. Don't reveal company code. The same thing, look for some sort of formal policy or guidance around AI. It might be attached to the security policy, or it could be implemented in a brand new policy, it just depends. But not only should these companies have policies, but they should be revisited often. As you saw Samsung, Apple, Microsoft, all these companies, they banned the use of generative AI and then quickly lifted it. And so as quickly as the technology is moving, you should also be revisiting your policies. Also, you should be revisiting the data policies for the generative AI products too. Goes both ways. So when you're considering using them, if there's an option to opt out from sharing your input with the developer community as training data, check that box. You can also avoid sharing proprietary information too. Check that box. Make sure that you're reading all the fine lines before using. Also recommend marking files that have partially AI generated content with a comment. This is mostly for developers and people who are writing code. So not at the project level, not at the repo level, file by file. You can train your prompt output to have it include this text is generated by AI. Just like Google, if you are sending out an email via Gmail from your iPhone, you'll see that extra text at the bottom. This email came from iPhone. Same thing, AI generated, add a comment to every single function. This is going to be useful for a number of reasons. It will help you identify how much AI is being used. May even help you get out of a lawsuit. If you don't know where AI is being used, we just assume that it's being used everywhere. So make sure that you're documenting and you are commenting out your code. Workplace policies are also important, guardrails, confidentiality dangers. Make sure that you're communicating that with your coworkers, and also it should be written in documentation. If you have lawyers at your company, if you have IP counsel, you can also weigh out the infringement risks, like, hey, if I have a copyright infringement risk with the content that I've provided, what's the impact? What's the best practice? That's always a good thing to work hand in hand with your legal team if you don't have a policy, but also good to make those relationships. And then be aware of significant barriers related to ownership and authorship and credit for your work. We talked about that risk earlier. Make sure that you are aware of that prior to saying that you own something. And then you can also take steps to secure copyright if things are mostly written by humans, as a safeguard against unauthorized AI sourcing.
I think that's also very helpful for, like, I'm thinking specifically for our students, doing assignments, because that's, again, as a university, we don't have exams. The way students get assessed is based on assignments that they do, so when it comes to, it could be a good tool, but again, how to avoid it from, just going too far, or for it to be considered quote unquote cheating.
Yeah, that is definitely a slippery slope. And the way, and we see it for conferences as well. We see people submit abstracts into large developer conferences, and most of the time, recently in the last year, we are seeing a lot more content that's given to us from AI, and there are conflicting viewpoints. Some people say, why not? It's reducing the barrier for entry. We're getting more submissions. It's okay. And then we have your other side who are like, well, they didn't put the effort in. But I tend to be on the other side. I think it's okay to use generative AI and tooling, as long as you're doing the edits and making sure that you're not just copying and dumping right away.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And then scanning. So I'll touch a little bit on scanning tools. This is mostly for developer communities. There are tools out there that can scan your code. And similar to scanning, I guess we can say there's also AI checkers. So if you want to see if something is written by AI, you can also do an AI checker. You could do a Google search for, check if this writing is written by AI. Sometimes they're accurate. Sometimes they're just totally off. I'll write something myself and then we'll say AI wrote it. So I don't know how reliable these checkers are, but some of these scanning tools, they are really good. There's tools, there's one called ScanOSS, False ID, Black Duck. They can do open source license scanning. And if you have code output, what you could do is you could take that output, stick it into the scan, make sure that it's not copied, make sure there's no license and open source dependency issues, make sure there's no security issues. And then this is especially important if you are inadvertently copying and pasting code output from generative AI code assisted tools. And then this becomes really critical if you are shipping that code and that product out to a customer. That's when you start running into a lot of big issues potentially. And yeah, so those are basically the best practices. If you have more questions on any of these, I know I touched briefly on each of them, but I can dive a lot deeper at a different time because it's probably not a 5-minute thing. But these are some of the best practices that I've identified.
Thank
And
you.
then next slide.
Next slide.
So here's some of the day-to-day tools that I've been using. And then these are ones that I think that they're a good way to get started. If you haven't used any AI tools, they're kind of broad and general, but also some of them are also used by our developers. Scribe, this one. So have you ever found yourself, you're in a meeting and you are leading the meeting, you're taking the notes, you're moderating the meeting, you're making sure everyone's voice is heard, you're watching all the mute buttons, making sure that who's unmuted so you can call on them. This is really hard to do for one person. So having this tool called Scribe, it actually you can record your meeting, you can have it completely scribed. You don't need an extra person to scribe it. They record it and dictate it, and then it becomes searchable, which is really nice. I tend to forget what happens in a meeting after, like, as soon as I'm out. And so as long as if I don't have good notes and documentation to go back to. So Scribe basically records all your meetings and then it makes them searchable, shareable, easy to share. Copilot is another one we briefly talked about. This one is the AI code assistant. So you can type in English or natural language descriptions, and then your code comes out. And this goes across multiple programming languages. Grammarly, you might have already heard, this one's probably more mainstream. This is a writing and grammar enhancement tool. It fixes spelling, grammatical errors. If you're a grammar person and you are picky about how your text looks, this is a good one. And then, of course, ChatGPT, we've talked a lot about. This one is the conversational AI model. Highly recommend digging in, trying it out. You can ask questions, you can ask it to do tasks, you can ask all kinds of things. For me, this helps with writing, blog writing, documentation, even emails, believe it or not, and developer documentation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's interesting because in your Spider-Man, the example that you have, which I really enjoyed, because again, layman's term and all that. It's incredible what you said, that I personally am using tools and I don't even think it's just there, and it's incredible how you get adapted whether you want it or not. But again, for our audience purpose, I don't know if you'll be, Sheila, you would be a better person to answer it, or Amir. So we were talking about how employers and companies are implementing, how they're using and all that. But from a student standpoint, or I shouldn't say student, someone that's applying for a job, whether it's promotion within their own company or they're looking for a new opportunity. So we hear that companies are adapting, using AI as a recruiter, but as an individual that you're looking for opportunity, what tools is best to use? What advice do you have? What are some of the, the insider information, if you will? And then in addition, what should we be aware of or be careful?
I can start. I'll start with a couple, and then I know Amir also has some experience that he can share on this. So I'll start with, if you don't have a bio, you can use ChatGPT to have it write you a bio, and you can use it to, if you ask ChatGPT to write you a bio without feeding input of what you actually do and who you are, it might give you a totally different person's bio. So I don't recommend, well, I recommend doing that just to see what the output is, but also make sure that you put the right inputs in. You can also just paste your resume into ChatGPT and have it write you a bio based on that. So that's one of the first steps I would recommend. And then also when you're applying to jobs, you can have it write you a cover letter. Just like I said, the piece that's super important is to make sure that you're doing the manual editing afterwards. Don't just dump whatever you get from ChatGPT or generative AI tools and call it final. make sure that that human intervention layer piece is there. But those are the two first steps I would recommend, and I'll pass it over to Amir and see if he has any.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's like a very topical point of the conversation. Um, there's a lot you can do, and we can get into examples. Like you could basically per job, you could have a large language model modify your resume to better match the requirements. So a lot of what's happening is on the back ends, there are a lot of AI systems that are doing this screening. And a lot of folks are starting to use these tools. So the one thing I'll say is if you don't learn how to use them and take advantage of them, you're going to fall behind. So that's really the way I think people should start thinking about the tools. And so the first step would be just familiarizing yourself with the tools. And I was reading through the Q&As just right now, and like I want to highlight this as an example. Like Khalil asked, "Hi, Mr. Jalali, is any one of these GPD modules being implemented or tried in mining industry, especially for mobile fleet?" You know, that's the kind of question that I like to see because I have no idea what that means. And like, you know, that's the perfect use case for these tools. You know, like you'll be able to use them in ways that I could never imagine. And but if you're not using it, somebody else in your industry or one of your other peers, if they're using it, they're going to have an advantage in comparison to you. So I'd like to more generally tell people that, you know, these are tools that can be really helpful in advancing your career in a variety of ways. And like the first step is to familiarize yourself with their capabilities and capacities. And a lot of what Sheila said is really important because you might get overconfident in what they're outputting, and all of a sudden, you know, you send somebody the biography of Abraham Lincoln instead of your own. You know, it's a little tricky. So make sure you're trying to use them and figuring out how they fit into your workflow. That's probably the better answer I could give rather than like this is how you specifically could benefit because everything is moving really fast. As soon as you start using AI to make your resume, you know, nicer than the AI is using another AI to scan through the resumes, and it's like this never-ending thing. So I think education is the biggest part of that.
To educating yourself, you mean?
Yeah.
Thank you.
And
Adina is asking how AI will affect the workforce in terms of employment.
I'll give a quick answer. I'll be honest, I don't think people know. I think there's definitely going to be areas where jobs are that were repetitive, and you know, you're just doing the same thing over and over again. A lot of call service jobs, things like that in the medium term, doesn't look great for them. But on the hindsight of that, like there's so many new things that are being imagined today that we just weren't able to do, you know, a few years ago. So I think there's going to be overall, the landscape's going to look very differently. I think it'll hopefully lead to more jobs, but a lot of the jobs aren't going to remain the same. So if you're thinking about a job as something that you go and you do over and over again, whether at a computer or, you know, I think those jobs are probably going to be first in line to be eliminated. And so I think creativity and, you know, imagination is going to become a little bit more at a premium.
Thank you. And we have a question from Daryl that says, what are your thoughts on AGI?
I
What
saw
is
that.
AGI?
AGI is uh, artificial general intelligence. It's the idea that, you know, it's going to, you know, become alive and, you know, take over. And I think everybody has a different opinion on that. You know, it's kind of like aliens. You know, I think from my perspective is as the tools grow more and more powerful, the only piece that's not really there is that part where it's the motivation, where it'll start doing things on its own and has its self-interest. So I haven't really seen anything to indicate that. I'm not saying it won't happen. That was like early on in the slides what I was talking about, where the fear really is because we don't understand why it knows math. The worry is maybe if we train it one extra cycle, all of a sudden it'll be conscious. So it's a valid fear that I don't think anybody really has an answer for. And you know, like I try to be an optimist, so I don't think about what happens if Terminator comes alive.
Do we have more time for more questions?
Yeah, we have,
Maybe
we
Sheila,
still have,
yeah, I would
yeah,
like to hear
any
like Sheila's
questions.
answer on the AGI question as well, because it's just a personal kind of you know, really personal debate.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up the Terminator thing. I think when I was a when I was a kid and I watched that movie, I mean, that was probably the scariest piece of it for me. But I think as AI has come into our world, I don't see it as a huge threat. It's not scary to me as of right now. So we'll see. We'll see in the next 10 years.
We have another question. How's data privacy being handled in the AI arena right now and at a global level?
I had so tying into this question, Khalil had a second question as well, which was how to ensure that data transfer from the client's plant or equipment to third-party vendor, you know, to make sure that your data is secure. So that's one of the tricky things with using a vendor like OpenAI. Originally, in their terms and services, they said that we might use your data for training, and they changed that. But you never really know what's happening once you send your data over to another company. So a lot of people are training their own models for their own, use cases, and that way they have full control over where the data is going, and they're not sending it to an external vendor. So I think that's if the data is really sensitive at this point, that's the place to look at. You might trust Microsoft or Google or somebody to hand over your data, but I don't think that's a good. If you're really concerned, the idea would be you either host an open source model and try to run it locally, or you know, I don't. Right now, there's no really good way around that if you're running it on somebody else's models.
Yeah, and I will just add that do not add PII or any kind of customer sensitive data into any of these generative AI tools unless you are using a private version or a local version, like Amir had stated. It is not something that it's not a best practice, and it brings on a lot of risk. And it's also not good for your customers if they find out that their sensitive information was entered. They'll probably be very angry.
So most of our students, there are all of our students really, they're in management position, leadership, and we have students that are actually we have students in their 60s, 70s, which is, I think it's incredible, and they're, continuing with their education. So as a younger generation, I feel like you're born into it. It's just easier for you to adapt. For individuals that are more mature, and let's say they are, so I love that Sheila, you gave us 4 tools to look into and use immediately. But if someone is not really tech savvy, right, and they're looking for, because when Glassdoor became a thing, and when now you have all these best practices for LinkedIn, now there are ways for you to learn, now it picks up keywords or whatnot. Do you guys have any recommendation or advice for individuals that want to, again, on a easier or simpler level, and make sure that they are not totally out there and they're within the game?
I have a really good anecdote on this because actually one of the most prolific ChatGPT users I know is my father. So I actually introduced him to it, and he came back really quickly and said, "Wow, it can translate to Farsi for me, or like things that I didn't even know it could do." So what I would encourage people to not really think of this as an intimidating technology product, because the interface is so natural that I really encourage folks that feel like this might be intimidating to actually go and try to use it, because I think one of the great advantages of it is how accessible it is, and that's really helpful for somebody that feels intimidated. My father kind of, it really helped him with responding to emails, and it really pushed his output dramatically. So I think it's exactly the opposite of what people are worried about. It's not this intimidating thing. It's a very accessible way for them to enhance their knowledge gaps, or just help them integrate in the modern workforce. Where like before, it might have been that way with the new technical tools that we had. It was like do this, do that, do that. Here, you're just having a conversation.
Yeah, I have a similar story to Amir, actually. My mother-in-law, she's been using ChatGPT. I went over there over the weekend and had this amazing zucchini bread. And I was like, where did you learn this zucchini bread? And she said, I got the recipe from ChatGPT. I've been seeing her, powering through emails, and just her communication has vastly improved since using these tools. And I think it probably took about an hour just to do the training. It's very, very user friendly and low barrier for entry for use.
Thank you so much. Bill, I'm gonna hand off to you.
Yeah, absolutely. We have 3 minutes just on that. Do you think ChatGPT has such a big user database because of the user experience? So I remember ChatGPT, when I tried it, I type in my email and I'm already there. Like it's like a Slack channel, but just private. I mean, private in the sense of just putting whatever we wanted for our marketing, whatever that is, helping me with copy, anything like that. It was amazing. Then you do something like Midjourney, which is you see all these examples of real photos, but you sign up, they say, join our Discord server. Then you're in with this huge group of people, and then you're kind of like, what's going on here? So do you think that's going to be something that people are trying to figure out, is like how the adoption process? So ChatGPT for me, when I look at other ones, have perfected that. It was super easy, type in my email. The other ones seem to have 50 steps, and then we're joining servers, joining Slack channels, things like that. So do you think as AI evolves that we're going to start seeing a little bit more user adoption and user experience being looked at?
I think oh, go ahead, Amir.
Go ahead, Sheila. I have to say something about Midjourney, but I'll let you finish.
Okay, I was just going to say that we are starting to see some of the AI features embedded into some of the day-to-day apps that people use. Like, let's say Facetune, for example, you'll see there's an AI piece. I think as time goes by, we'll start to see it embedded closely with some of the apps, and the adoption is going to get easier. I agree with you on Midjourney. Amir is the pro here. He's been doing a lot of work in Midjourney. So go for it, Amir. Over to you.
Yeah. So one of the interesting stats about Midjourney is they're a team of 11 people, full-time employees, and they're hitting 200 million in revenue. So what they're doing is amazing. Like the scale that they've been able to produce at that low level of per employee output is just probably like unmatched. They are a bit complex. One of the interesting things about Midjourney is they present it in a way where they give you 4 pictures and you can click which ones you want, or you say, I like this one, I don't. They use that information to actually go back and train and make it better and better. So they've created a user interface that, like, you don't know this, but you're helping them become better and better, and you're paying for it. So it's an ingenious way kind of doing it. And there's a trade-off there with making it very user friendly. Like, I want a picture of a cat, versus if you think Midjourney is bad, there's Stable Diffusion, which is like much more difficult, but you have so much more control. It's like, you want a picture of a cat, but it's laying on a sofa. I want its paws to be like this and like that. So there's always a trade-off between how much control you want to give to the end user versus creating something that's very accessible and it might be really fun and So I think for their respective use cases, I think OpenAI has done a great job. And actually, if you check it out recently, they have built their image creator into ChatGPT. And so that works really well because now you can instruct it in natural language and say, I like this picture, but I want it to be like that. It's incredible how quickly you can come up with a logo. You can come up with so much of like the branding and design stuff that used to take you so long. So there's definitely use cases for both, I think. But I think even OpenAI was really surprised at their growth. I mean, that's the interesting part.
Absolutely. Well, I think we're at time. I just want to thank everyone in the lobby. Almost everyone stayed. I know we're over an hour now, but thanks, Sheila. Thanks, Amir, so much for being on this webinar as a panelist and going through all the exciting things for the future of AI and in the workforce. So thanks, everyone. If we didn't get to your questions, we'll send out an EDM. We can maybe answer them through email. So thanks everyone for joining, and till next time. Thanks everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
you.
Have a great day. Bye.